Thanks for having us here, to the SANS team and everyone for joining us. This is Picture Perfect, the power of attack path diagrams in DFIR investigations. Just to run you through what we're going to do, we'll introduce ourselves pretty much the same as Phil did for us in a second. We're going to cover when you should use attack path diagrams or when you could use them. We want to inspire you to use them a little bit more than you either never have or already are. We'll talk about some of the considerations we have when planning how to create a diagram, what we think about the formats or tools we have used or you could use. We'll run through some specific scenarios, like starting points in case you've never made one before and you want to see what an example looks like. You can take that right away. And then we'll walk through what it looks like to have an idea, put it on paper, and get something published and polished from that start to finish. And in terms of our bonus question mark here, one of our favorite sources is publicly available, nothing secret, but we didn't include anything about it here. Catch us at lunch afterwards if you want to learn more about where we get some really specific and fantastic inspiration for our attack path diagrams.
All right, my name is Brad Slaybaugh. I'm an incident response lead at Mandiant. I've been doing investigations probably for over about 10 years now, and really excited to kind of talk to you guys about how we introduce attack path diagrams into those investigations and kind of our experience with those.
Awesome. And I'm Dave Pany, also at Mandiant for about 10 years doing forensics and investigations and all that kind of fun stuff. So you have a couple goals. The easy goal to explain is you're trying to take your information that you found from very technical places, right? We've talked about lots of artifacts, different types of artifacts, and make a picture about it to tell a story. Some of the specific goals we have for them is highlighting things we know and also things we don't know. These are the goals we're trying to figure out based on previous projects. We think this happened. We think they escalated privileges here or stole data here, but we're still working on that as part of our investigation process. And then you can take all of these findings, what you know, what you don't know, visualize it, and then customize it to your audience. Take something that's extremely technical. We're all here with years of experience and training, and deliver that to someone who didn't know what forensics was yesterday and now needs to understand. So some of the considerations that you should think about when you first start creating your diagram or thinking about creating your diagram: what's your audience going to look like? You may have different audiences. You may have a diagram you use for your direct teammates to share your very specific technical view. That may look different than the diagram you use to explain to someone who's less technical, an executive or a board or your boss or whoever, a blog post. There's a couple scenarios we'll run through. We'll talk about the tools you use, but that might also dictate the color schemes you use. Are you going to use dotted lines, solid lines? This sounds a little bit silly, but you'll see some examples about how we talk about it and why it's important to think about what you know and how you're going to do it that way. Also, we like to use icons where we can. If you're just using generic stencils that show a firewall or server, it might not mean as much to your audience if you're using you copy a brand name in there or put some more descriptive information. Helps it relate a little better. Transparency is a technique we can use if we're trying to show different parts of a complex diagram and we want to fade some out so we can prioritize on the ones in full focus. Think about those in your overall designs. Already talked about icons, but custom logos, there it is again. And then also a thing that can be difficult depending on the complexity is adding in a time frame, right? You have a complex situation that goes in different directions, all at different times. How do you visualize what that time looks like? There's a couple techniques we'll talk through, but that can be trickier than you might first think when you get started. So when do you want to do it? Anytime. Basically, we like to answer the phone and an organization tells us this is what's happening. I like to write that down and draw a little picture, talk through it with my team. When we start having more investigation calls, we go over that regularly and say, this is what we're understanding. Does that match your understanding? Because you often have different parties and teams with different sets of information and experience, and you want to make sure you're on the same page. Diagrams are a good way to do that. So when you're sharing your findings also with an organization, a victim, a client, your bosses, whoever, diagrams of a picture is worth 1,000 words. Your board meetings, right? Can't run through a big Excel timeline with someone who is used to looking at financial statements. Maybe the pictures will help. And just documenting what you've done. Like I mentioned, we like to use a status update every day. If we find a new major finding, we'll put it in the timeline and people can key in on that. And the last place we talked about unknowns there, we've had a couple projects where we're staring at a dead end. We know this happened and this happened, but we don't know how they are connected. Drawing out the diagram and focusing on the unknowns allows us to focus our QA review on, let's put some effort, really just go through these logs one more time, or let's make sure we're getting a forensic image for keyword searching from a system we only had a live collection for, and helps us drive our investigation decisions. And we're also really excited that our attack path diagrams talk is being diagrammed. So this is a great time to use diagrams as well. And if you've ever thought, geez, I could never do a diagram, I've never started. This is one of our OG diagrams of the attack path lifecycle. And if you've ever thought of an engagement through this type of, or an investigation through this type of workflow, where this is how the attacker did what they did, congratulations, you've just made an attack path diagram. Just put it right into this format and call yourself done. So I'd just like to give a shout out to our old friend.
All right, next up, diagram tools. So what are some of the tools that we can use to start building these diagrams? Starting right away, pen and paper, start scratch padding the ideas. What do we know about the incident so far and what are our gaps? I think this is the easiest way to get information on paper and start to brainstorm how we want this attack path diagram to look like. A couple examples here from some pretty complex investigations where we see malware in a bunch of systems and we're not quite sure how they're all related. So starting to make those connection points, what are the unknowns? We can really start to key in on where our investigation needs to go, and kind of highlight the areas of what we do know. I also think it's important that you can kind of write down some of the key events that we want to capture on our attack path diagram in this kind of scratch padding phase. Next up, a very common tool that I think a lot of folks use, PowerPoint. Here we have a very simplistic attack path diagram that can be very easy to present to leadership or non-technical audiences. And it also captures the information that we're looking to capture with our attack path diagram. We can see the attacker exploited a public-facing web server, from there moved laterally into the environment, deployed ransomware, maybe did some data theft to a file transfer server using a utility like rclone. Very easy to kind of walk through a non-technical audience of what occurred at each stage, and really focusing in on the key events that happened. Next up, if we take PowerPoint and kind of maybe we need to tailor our attack path diagram to a more technical audience, maybe we're working with our network engineers, our IT staff, and they need to understand the intricacies of what systems are impacted. We start to add labels to our diagrams here. So we have system names, we have IP addresses, we can kind of break down components of that web server that's important to highlight in the attack path. Maybe there's a particular exploit that our web server wasn't patched for. We can call that out specifically just to kind of, bring into fruition the whole incident as it occurred. So it applies to all our technical targeted audience here. Another very common tool that a lot of folks like to use, Visio. A lot of already baked in stencils that can kind of build out like workstations, servers, very easy to diagram that together. So, really what it comes down to is finding a tool that is comfortable for you and that you feel like you can really adapt with as the investigation unfolds. You can expand as more information is identified. You identify new systems that are compromised, new techniques the attacker's doing, things like that. Really, the goal here is just to find a tool that you're most comfortable using, that makes sense to you, and that you can use to really present the attack path to your various targeted audiences. So, we talked about the tools, kind of like the basics of diagrams of the what we can do. A lot of things that I like to do with attack path diagrams, and that David mentioned as well, is including icons. I think this kind of helps jump out in the attack path diagram. So we can see, which servers had backdoors on them. So how is the attacker getting back into our environment? Where did they steal the credentials from? Did they on the domain controller? Did they steal the NTS.dit? Was it on a random server where they ran a tool like Mimikatz? Let's highlight that in our attack path diagram. Where did they perform network reconnaissance from? Things like that are important in the investigation, important for all parties to know of what happened. Another thing that we mentioned was different line types. So using dotted lines, I like to use that whenever we kind of have gaps into what an attacker was doing or how an attacker accessed a particular system. So let's say we're in an investigation. We have 3 servers down in the bottom here that we identified backdoors on, but for whatever reason, we don't have logs available. Maybe the attacker cleared event logs, or maybe our SIM just doesn't have the events for those particular systems. So we don't know how the attacker accessed those systems, but we do know that they were accessed. So we can kind of use maybe a dotted line, like in this example here, to show that the attacker did make its way to those systems, but we don't have that clear, concise data point to make the direct connection of how they accessed it. And also color coding. I like to use this like in diagrams where an attacker, let's say they deployed Cobalt Strike to like 20 systems, but they're really only accessing 3 of those. We look at our firewall logs, we look at our NetFlow logs, and we only see that they're connecting into 3 of those systems. So maybe we highlight those lines as red to kind of emphasize the 3 systems that the attacker was coming back into in the environment to access those backdoors. Another thing too, with data exfil or data theft, a lot of times the attacker will copy data from a file share to another server to then exfil it out to their server. So we can kind of use a different color coding there as well, just to make it easier whenever various audiences are looking at it that may not be as super familiar with the investigation, can quickly identify the points of interest that they're interested in. Here's an example of a diagram that we used on an investigation a while back. Kind of redacted some of the information here and changed the dates. But just to kind of highlight, some of the things that we've talked about. We see the attacker use 2 workstations that they primarily access the environment from. They accessed a legacy VDI that the customer had set up that still had single factor authentication on it. But so we kind of zoned that out into the left there. And then from there, they made that hop over into the corporate environment, compromising a server that was directly connected to that VDI, performed some reconnaissance inside the network, then kind of moved on to gain additional credentials, deploying backdoors, and then ultimately making it to their target file server, where they then perform data exfil out to their C2 server here. Pretty linear attack path here. Very easy to kind of show that like timeline from July 3rd to July 6th here, so roughly like a 3 or 4 day period. Another thing that to call out is that we do have like a legend in the top to kind of show like what each of the icons mean. So we can kind of take this attack path diagram, show it to our analysts that are working on maybe our network engineers, people that need to be in the know, or our leadership team, our non-technical audiences when we're kind of talking through the incident to help them visualize what occurred. And then we can kind of talk through various scenarios, allow them to ask questions on things that they may not be sure of, or if they want to focus in on a specific portion of the attack path, the diagram kind of helps, I think, drive that conversation and allow for that conversation to occur. Other tools as well. So, just to call out some other tools that are out there, the big thing here, find a tool that you're most comfortable using. Doesn't have to be PowerPoint, doesn't have to be Visio. If you wanted to use Paint, by all means, use Paint. Whatever you feel the most comfortable using, use that tool. And it should be something that you can adapt with as the investigation unfolds, that you can easily expand upon. I know there's a variety of third-party options and online options out there as well. Just be cognizant of the data that you're putting out on those like third-party options. A lot of times attack path diagrams will contain sensitive information related to an incident. So we just got to keep that in mind when using third-party options like that.
Awesome. So we talked about why you do it, a couple tools to do it. Here are some example formats and scenarios that we've run through and kind of customize as good starting points. Up first is our simplest, just a line with some other lines and some words, right? A timeline. It's one thing to say, well, this happened on this date, this happened on another date. Showing that sequenced in this series of events really helps different audience members understand that sometimes a lot of things happen in a short period of time, then there were gaps, and then more things happen, And not just that all of this happened, but it did happen at very specific time frames. So this is maybe the simplest way to get started if you've never done a visual sort of timeline. If you've usually done tables, just making it visual can help different audience members understand how the sequence of an attack worked and how the investigation unfolded, and then even how your investigation or remediation containment steps factored into some of these you can include as well. This one we're quite proud of. After we made it, we said, oh, this looks like the USB logo, which I thought was kind of neat. But we're talking about color coding. We're talking about some dotted lines here. This was an example where an actor got into a main corporate environment. They actually deployed one type of ransomware variant, and then they moved to the other ransomware, or they moved to other staging environments and that were related. Some of them we didn't quite have the one logon event that we needed to prove it. So we used the dotted line. We said, we're pretty sure this is how they happened. We saw them like in the timeline move from this environment to this, and then they ended up deploying a separate ransomware encryption variant and extorting the organization twice. And we were able to help call them on their bluff because the forensics clearly showed it was the same team doing the same things with the same access. But just one way to show moving around a different environment and in a high level way. So specific to business email compromise, have some logos, some screenshots, some color coding with the arrows, walking through an attacker at the top, sending an email to actually a personal email account. That user clicked on the email as a fake DocuSign link, took them to a fake email sign-on link. That password went back to the actor. The actor said, oh, now I have the password. I'm going to log into the email. Each of these are color coded for the various phases. That email prompted multi-factor pushes to the original phished user. After a few push requests, they said, I've had it, just go away and accept, which is a story we hear a lot separately. But then once they were in, they completed their mission, changed some payroll information to redirect funds, and phished other users at the organization. Not only can you diagram out how an actor moved around from systems, and now with cloud applications, it's a little more complicated, but we found diagrams to be extremely helpful for all kinds of analysis support. So this is actually our reverse engineering team's Sunburst malware flowchart. We stole it from them. Probably should have asked if we could, but it was on the blog, so hopefully it was okay. But we spent many hours looking at this, trying to figure out what stage of the malware Sunburst presence is active in this environment. If it had this DNS A record, what does that mean? If it connected to an IP, what does that mean? If these indicators are on the endpoint, what does it mean? And these flowcharts were very complicated, but much better than trying to read through, a text document or a Word document from a malware report. So this diagramming of ideas and concepts and flows really applies to a lot of situations, and encourage anyone to try it out. A very specific other example, many years ago, we started seeing a lot of logons to systems, and the source IP address was 127.0.0.1. Very confusing. The first time we'd seen this, it's the loopback, said the system was logging onto itself. Didn't make any sense at first. Then we started seeing tools like P-Link that were creating network sessions open to attacker command and control servers. Now most backdoors have this RDP tunneling functionality built in. But either way, tried to understand why is the system recording its own logon from the loopback IP address? And what we figured out through some research and testing with the Ubuntu VM, I'm not saying the attackers are going to use that, but that's what I did. They'll open up an outbound network tunnel because a lot of organizations allow outbound on 443 or 22 or et cetera, connects to the attacker server. They just RDP back in through that tunnel. It lands at the ephemeral port of the outbound tunnel and then jumps right over to port 3389 to go to RDP. So it was coming from one local port to another. Just interesting ways to solve a problem, and helped when we drew some diagrams about it. And this example shows two clusters of activity separated by dates. We didn't have a direct link to put them together. We were pretty sure they were the same actor, just trying different things in the environment. You can see we use some custom graphics, some dotted lines, and a neat thing that to introduce here is on the section on your right, you see 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is a bit of a messy diagram. It's hard to tell what happened in the sequence of time. It's not left to right as the simpler ones would be. So just add some numbers in and help the reader and the audience understand this is where we need to look first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. So just putting a couple of the techniques Brad talked about into play.
All right, next up, we're going to walk through kind of the evolution of a diagram that we worked, fairly recently for an investigation that had a lot of complex components to it, a lot of things that we had to try to figure out, and kind of how we walked through and worked through that diagram. Starting out, what we knew is we had an attacker that had compromised firewall edge devices, pivoted from there over to hypervisors, and was accessing the guest VMs on there. Some fairly complex techniques that we hadn't seen before that we wanted to make sure we were kind of running down all our sources of evidence to kind of investigate this activity. So we wrote down, we kind of very simple here. If you look at these diagrams, very simplistic in nature, but we were just starting to make those connection points and then highlighting some of the information that we knew and what we wanted to make sure we were tracking and capturing from this. So we captured the key events. We wrote down the backdoor ports that they were using, the C2 servers, accounts, and things like that to make sure that we had the information that we wanted to make sure was being relayed in this attack path diagram. So as we took the scratch pad from the pen and paper and moved it over to a slide deck, we were able to kind of trace the various ways the attacker was accessing the environment, through these compromised firewalls, then pivoting over to the various hypervisors, several of which they had deployed backdoors onto, and then accessing the hypervisors, from the hypervisors accessing the hosted guest VMs. A variety of techniques that we talked about here, using those icons to show the firewalls, the hypervisors, icons for which ones were infected, which ones, they may have just been accessing through normal user credentials. And then also kind of showing that segmentation of we have the edge layer there, and then we kind of move over into like the corporate environment, the virtualized environment, and ultimately zeroed in on that virtual machine. Makes it much easier when talking to a variety of technical and non-technical audiences, and allowing them to, ask questions for things they may not understand, or if they want to focus in on a specific area of the attack path or the attack lifecycle. This diagram can kind of help navigate those conversations and allow them to make sure that they're understanding the incident to the best that they can. Based on this investigation, we knew that there was some things that we wanted to make sure we were sharing with the InfoSec community. There's some new techniques and observables that we identified. We had been working with a couple of organizations that were seeing a similar attack path. So we had this diagram that was in PowerPoint that you see here, but we kind of wanted to make it a little bit more formalized that we could include in like our final investigation reports. We could put out in a blog post to share to the InfoSec community. So the next step was to kind of work with our graphics team. And during this process, we wanted to iron out, kind of standardize those graphics, make sure we had servers, firewall logos. We used those color coding lines for things that we didn't, or to kind of show different attack paths that the attacker had. And since this wasn't such a linear attack path that the attacker was following, we used that numbering scheme that Dave kind of mentioned as well to show the sequence of events that the attacker took inside the environment, just to kind of make it easier for someone who may not be as familiar with the investigation to kind of follow the attack path that the attacker took and some of the key events that occurred in each of those phases. So this was, kind of a multi-purpose diagram that we can use to share information with, maybe it's other analysts during an analyst exchange, a blog post, whatever it may be, but also take this and use this with the, with their C-level executives, their board, their, IT security managers, analyst exchange, anything like that. Really a multi-purpose diagram to kind of allow them to see the incident at a high level and then ask particular questions for maybe areas that they want to know a little bit more about. All right. And then just kind of wrapping things up here, just to recap a few things. Attack path diagrams, use them anywhere at any time. I think every incident can use an attack path diagram, and then the sooner you get started, the better. It really helps you diagram and visualize what is already known and starting to connect those dots, and what are some of the gaps in our visibility or our knowledge of the incident so far. There are a lot of tools out there that you can use to make attack path diagrams. Really, it comes down to what are you most comfortable using? What is something that you can evolve with over time as that investigation unfolds and you learn more information and can incorporate that into your attack path diagram. You can illustrate pretty much any attack. I think, Dave showed a lot of examples where we can use timelines. We can talk about particular malware families and how they work. We can talk about, a very simple attack path where an attacker compromises a web server, and then, just no matter how simple or complex the investigation is, you can usually visualize it. And I think it just adds an extra level of depth to your presentation or, your target audience to help them understand the totality of the incident. And the biggest thing too is, you don't have to wait till the end of the incident to build an attack path diagram. By starting right away, it helps you get organized with what is known. A lot of times these investigations, there's a million things going on at once. So having a consolidated diagram from early on can help drive additional workflows and what needs to be ironed out as the investigation unfolds. And, your attack path diagram can improve and evolve with that over time. So yeah, with that said, that is attack path diagrams. Happy to take any questions, or if anyone has any follow-on commentary of how they've used attack path diagrams in their own work.
Cool, thank you very much. One question that probably you wouldn't be able to answer live here, but hopefully you can drop into Slack. Question from one of our instructors who's actually in Australia, longest distance question I think we'll have today, asking if you could provide any information on the tools that you used for the diagrams in the presentation itself. I think he's kind of interested in experimenting with those. So hopefully that's something that you can add into that thread. And then the other question was, do you mark these with TLP controls as well? Do you consider these to be under that umbrella, or is there some other way of restricting that information to preserve OPSEC?
Yeah, that's a good question. We certainly will use like TLP controls where needed. So let's see if I can go back a slide here. For this particular diagram, we were working with particular victims in a certain sector of industry. So prior to this information being released publicly, this was under like a TLP Amber type protocol where we were sharing this with other organizations in that industry that may be impacted by this. So really it comes down to the investigation, the type of work you're doing, where that's at in the release of the knowledge that matters. Very simply, we would just kind of put like a TLP Amber or TLP Red, whatever the TLP protocol would be, kind of as a header on top of the diagram, and then whatever the collateral or markings you need to use to capture that information for the TLP, we would just add that on. So yeah.
And I think all of these diagrams for their presentation were PowerPoint, pen and paper, or Visio. So I don't think we used any secret magic sauce for that. And just to clarify, all of these diagrams are TLP green. Nothing here is the secret. I made sure it was all cleaned up and good to share. But as Brad said, it's going to depend on what the project and organization, what your roles are, but you can certainly put whatever restrictions you need to on them.
Cool, excellent. Any other questions before we springboard forward? One on the other side. Hang on just 1 minute. Questions over here.
So do you maintain like templates that help you speed up the diagram process, or are you building every diagram from nothing?
So from my experience, I will a lot of times, based on the investigation, will maybe start with like a previous diagram that I built. What I found, like a lot of times I primarily use PowerPoint. So I'm just going to go back. This is probably a good slide to work off of. A lot of my diagrams will look like this. So it's very like all the tools are built into PowerPoint, and it's very easy to kind of like snap the lines together, use those like little call outs where you want to focus in on or call out specific events that are occurring. So it depends a lot, but a lot of times I will borrow pre-built diagrams that I've used in the past and then start to modify that information to the current incident. So yeah, I don't know, Dave, if you have any.
I have a PowerPoint deck full of
Yeah.
these basically, and they're blank templates. After I'm done with the project, I clean them all out and keep the lines and the blocks, and I move them around. So, but there are times where we need a whole new concept and we come up with one from scratch. So I try to reuse what we can.
Any other questions? Ryan Scout, all right, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you both.